November 1st, UPI New Orleans Saints target Michael Thomas leads our top 50 wide receivers for Week 9. He leads a shallow field, as Keenan Allen, Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, Antonio Brown, Chris Hogan, Brandon Cooks and others sit out with Week 9 byes. Your matchup is likely affected in some way this week by the fact that 6 teams are on a bye for the second consecutive week. If you own one of those stud wide receivers, be sure to have a reliable option locked into your lineup. If your opponent needs a replacement, try to monitor the waiver wire and prohibit them from picking up help. Feel free to take a look at my top pickups and drops article for Week 9 for some of my favorite targets. Here are my top 50 options at the position this week. Top 50 Week 9 rankings below top shelf. Michael Thomas is a WR1 for the rest of the season, but he is my favorite overall option for Week 9. The New Orleans Saints have a great matchup, facing a Tampa Bay Buccaneers secondary allowing the third most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Thomas has at least 7 receptions in 4 of his last 5 appearances. The Buccaneers allowed a receiving score to Kelvin Benjamin in Week 8, 107 yards to Deontay Thompson in Week 7 and was torched by Larry Fitzgerald in Week 6. Look for Drew Brees to get Thomas going in this one. Dallas Cowboys playmaker Dez Bryant is my number 6 option for Week 9. The Cowboys face the Kansas City Chiefs, a defense that has allowed the most receiving scores, third most yards and most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Bryant has 4 touchdowns on the season, including 2 in his last 3 games for the Cowboys. Expect an even bigger day here for Bryant as the Cowboys might be forced to throw the ball a bit more with Ezekiel Elliott suspended. Sneaky plays. Will Fuller is on fire. After sitting out the first 3 weeks of the season, the Houston Texans speedster has 3 multiple touchdown games in 4 appearances. He already has 7 touchdowns on the season, despite hauling in just 13 receptions. This week Fuller and quarterback Deshaun Watson face an Indianapolis Colts secondary that has allowed the second most receiving yards and 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Fuller is locked in as a low-end WR1 for me this week. The NFL trade deadline has come and gone and wide receiver Jarvis Landry is still with the Miami Dolphins. He should also be the Dolphins' top option Sunday against the Oakland Raiders, a defense that has allowed the 8th most receiving yards to opposing wide receivers. Before last week's 400 shutout loss, Landry had scored in 3 consecutive games. But that's not his game. Look for Landry to improve on his 80 targets, the second most in the NFL, and provide big value in PPR leagues. He is my number 13 option for Week 9 and a low-end WR1. Long shots. Detroit Lions wide receiver Golden Tate is my number 16 option for Week 9. The Lions have a matchup against the Green Bay Packers, a defense tied for allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Look for Tate to supply WR2 value in this matchup and improve on his 449 yards and 2 scores on the season. Kelvin Benjamin should get involved early and often in his Buffalo Bills debut. The former Carolina Panthers pass catcher was traded to the franchise on Tuesday. He'll line up against the New York Jets, a defense tied for allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. The Jets are also tied for allowing the 3rd most touchdowns to opposing wide receivers this season. Benjamin is a WR2 for me in Week 9 and my number 17 wide receiver.